Hello, American Justice Army, and welcome to Season 2 of the American Justice Podcast.
There is an epidemic in America's criminal justice system: the prosecution and conviction of innocent people for crimes they did not commit. Welcome to American Justice. The American Justice Podcast Army works to free men and women wronged by the criminal justice system. It's not only about the innocent who have been imprisoned, but also the victims of the crimes as well. No one deserves justice more than them. And now, here's your host, Scott Poggensee.
When we last met in Season 1, we were spreading the word about the Brandon Woodruff case. Well, as luck would have it, the right people heard our plea for help and came to our rescue. As of now, the Innocence Project of Texas is working hard on Brandon's case, and we hope to have some updated news soon. We'll keep you all posted as soon as we know, but know deep down that none of this would have ever been possible without your help and support. And for that, we thank each and every one of you. I really hope that you guys have been keeping up with our special episodes as well during this hiatus. We had some real good episodes, and we'll be bringing you lots of those in the future. I've been privileged enough to meet several other podcast hosts, and everyone has been nothing but gracious and generous. Just know it has been the honor of a lifetime to be your guide as we feature cases of the wrongfully convicted. We have some exciting updates here at the show, and I'll be sharing those with you in due time, but for now, sit back in your seats, grab your closest adult beverage, and hang on for the ride. It's about to get real. DJ, let's go.
This is the psycho, Michelle fight for the white gold. This one for the hood girls, them good girls, straight masterpiece. Styling, wildin', living it up in a city. Got chunks on with Saint Laurent. Gotta get my hair so pretty. Too hot.
All right. So what do we have in store for all of you? Oh, trust me, American Justice Army, we have yet another young man who needs our help. Let's start with some background about the location of this case. As with Brandon, the circumstantial evidence was the only thing to make his conviction possible. And, quite frankly, it's not even strong enough to point the finger of shame in his direction with any measurable amount of recognizable force. Oh, looky there. My head writer, C. Derick Miller, is already starting off with difficult pronunciations. That's okay, though. I'm more than up for the challenge this season. I've been saying all of my tongue twisters during the hiatus. Sally sells, she sells, Peter Piper, Pacta, Picker, Pepper. Well, you get the point. Unfortunately, though, we don't have access to the details of this case in the way that we were able to tell the elaborate story of Brandon Woodruff's history, his family, and entire world in Season 1. I've studied Brandon's case forever, and I know it inside and out, as though I was there when all of this was taking place. I wasn't, of course, but sometimes I do wish that I was. Maybe I could have stepped in and stopped the whole thing from happening in the first place. Maybe I'd know which of the shit kickers or which of the disgruntled family members actually pulled the trigger. If only. It seems as though the difference in both of these cases is strongly related to the differences between the powers that be and the defendants. In Brandon's case, the super conservative judge, jury, and prosecution team, not to mention the majority of Hunt County itself, thought Brandon lied about murdering his parents since he had successfully hidden his budding homosexuality for so long. Yes, that was enough to put him in prison for the rest of his life. No evidence, no witnesses, just conservative speculation. America, am I right? Well, at least this new America we're living in, trust me, it's far from improved, just new.
I see you around these parts again. I'm going to take you out to lunch, and you ain't going to like what's on the menu.
Now, our newest subject just happens to be an African-American man in a location of this country where he was incredibly outnumbered. And, as the rule of statistics would have it, the arresting officers, detectives, judge, and prosecution team were all white. Let me back up just a little bit. They're not just white. They're like super white, like super duper white. Like if white were a person and he were here and he saw himself, he'd be like, yo, that dude is white. Sorry, that's just the best way I can explain it. We'll go into racial statistics here in a bit, but just know that they're all white. This shouldn't mean anything, but it does. Oh, dear God. In the year 2021, this fact has made itself painfully aware. In the meantime, please allow me to take you all the way back to January 14th, 2006. You'll see throughout this season that the times haven't changed all that much. They were just a little more reserved back then. Jeez, I say that like it's a really long time ago. I actually remember 2006 very well, almost like it was yesterday. Hell, as far as my brain is concerned, it was yesterday, and I'd beg of you not to inform it otherwise. I'd like to slow down the coming years as much as I can. Anyway, some of you get what I'm trying to say. 2006 was not all that long ago in the grand scheme of things. Do you remember it? That was the year that Pluto was downgraded from a planet into I'm not even sure what it was downgraded to. A rock? Mickey Mouse's dog? Science decided to screw over our elementary school education and downgraded it from a planet. Did it matter? Absolutely not. We've never even been there. Also, the first Borat film was released. Not the one with Rudy Giuliani. The bird flu was discovered in Scotland. Google purchased YouTube, transforming it into the giant waste of time that it is today. Although they didn't make you watch a dozen commercials before getting to the video back then. And I guess I really shouldn't say that too loudly since all of our episodes go up on YouTube and who knows what those YouTube algorithms do. Most importantly, the dictator Saddam Hussein was captured and executed. He stretched his neck like I'm stretching out this introductory episode and recorded the whole thing for the world to see. Unfortunately, Satan didn't come up from below to save him like South Park episodes will have you believe. Since that moment, absolutely nothing has changed in the Middle East, and the United States is still over there fighting for your quote-unquote freedoms every day. All right, I'm really going to have to get Derick Miller off those political rants. No, maybe not. All right, so getting back to the story. Now, our Season 2 story takes place in January of 2006 in the village of Caledonia in Racine County, Wisconsin. Nothing as interesting as any of the above-mentioned things were going on, though. It was cold. Damn cold. It was cold, and somewhere there was cheese. Lots of cheese. I'm sure of it. Cold and cheese. Welcome to Wisconsin. Caledonia is a village. It was a town at one time, which, for some strange reason, in the Midwest is smaller than a village. You'd figure it would be the other way around, but you'd also figure that our judges and elected officials would have their heads out of their collective asses enough to where this podcast wouldn't even be necessary. Wish in one hand, shit in the other, I know. But they are as described, and we exist because of it. The double-edged sword of justice/entertainment. So, In 2006, Caledonia was a village of 34,000 people in the county of Racine. For all of you who are not familiar with the upper Midwest, Racine is about 25 miles south of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the shores of Lake Michigan and at the mouth of the Root River. Is that a little more specific for all of you? Okay, well, still to this day, Google is free and in all of our pockets, but I'll save you some swiping time and lay it all out for you. Now, for a little bit deeper dive into what we're dealing with here, just know that the population of Caledonia is 95% white. The African American population of Caledonia Village in the year 2006, 2%. 2 freaking percent. Actually, it's not even 2%. It's officially 1.99%. Now, for some simple math, 2% of 34,000 people is about 680 people. 680 people in the village are African American heritage. Basically, everyone knows everyone else. If you're part of that 2%, afloat the sea of white, you're probably well remembered. You'll never guess the heritage of this season's subject. Oh, and one last thing before we get into the American Justice Podcast case in chief for this season. A lot of people ask me how we get our suggestions for the cases that we cover. I want you to know that you are how we get the suggestions. If you have a friend that had a son or a daughter convicted of murder but just screamed up and down that they were innocent, we want to know about that. Send us an email, call, and leave us a voicemail. Hell, message me on Instagram. I don't care. Just let us know how. However, I need to give a huge shout out to Nick of the True Crime Garage podcast. You'll hear from Nick throughout the episodes of this season because he was the one that suggested it to me. As many of you will recall, Nick and the captain with the True Crime Garage covered Brandon's case last year in 2 episodes. Ever since then, I messaged Nick and told him who I was, and he said he was very appreciative of the work that we did on Brandon's case. In fact, he used a lot of what we talked about on the American Justice Podcast as research for his episodes. So ever since then, we formed somewhat of a friendship, and one day he said, Scott, I have this guy that I've been looking into, and I think he is completely innocent. Our show isn't really the format to tell his story, but I think your podcast might be. Do you mind taking a look? And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. When Nick asks you to take a look, you take a look. So I did, and the rest is history. It did not take long once I started looking at everything to realize that our subject was more than likely innocent, but 1,000% did not get a fair trial. So you'll be hearing from Nick throughout the season. He knows a lot about this case and was more than generous to share his knowledge with the American Justice Army. Okay, 2006. Murder was in the air in the Wisconsin village of Caledonia. A young girl, later identified as Stephanie Goins, was discovered face down in a ditch along a well-traveled road with multiple gunshot wounds in her back. Even though she was discovered in someone's front yard during a fairly early hour of the evening, no one saw or heard a damn thing. Typical, isn't it? A little over 33,000 white people going about their daily lives in the village of Caledonia, checking out their favorite frozen yogurt places or comparing each other's yoga pants. Wait, I'm sorry. I need to come up with some more stereotypical Caucasian behaviors if I insist on bashing my own race. They were watching movies on their iPod Nanos discussing how good the song Crazy was by Gnarls Barkley. Hint, it wasn't all that good. Now granted, I inadvertently groove to it whenever it hits my playlist, but still, it wasn't really all that good, was it? Yet to be determined. Still, these are probably the popular things that the upper Midwest white people were doing in January of 2006. Just take my word for it. Back to the really important part. There was a dead body in a yard full of gunshot wounds belonging to a young lady by the name of Stephanie Goins. Miss Goins' first name is spelled Stefnee, but I'm convinced that her mom wanted her name pronounced Stephanie. So that's what I'm going to call her. Plus, it's really difficult to pronounce two hard consonant sounds together. F and N don't really roll off the tongue. Stephanie. All right, so Stephanie it is. Now, it's really difficult to find out too much information about Stephanie Goins other than the fact that she was a victim of a horrible crime. Barely anything is mentioned about her personal likes or ambitions with a quick Google search other than the fact that she was heavily involved in church, but I mean, that's what they all say, isn't it? Every time you go to a funeral, the person conducting the service always swears up and down that the person who recently passed away was a huge believer in whatever organized religion is being advertised, and the person in question repented at the 0 hour. I've been to several funerals where I knew for a fact the person who died was a major fan of death metal and the Devil's Lettuce and would only enter a church if there was the Miss Nude America pageant being conducted inside. Anyway, you get the idea. No one in the village of Caledonia has really worked too terribly hard on any type of dedication to Miss Goins since her death to give us all a bit more of her personality or likes to memorialize. At first thought, it's almost like no one gives a damn. Then, you bring the whole 2% thing into it. 95% of the population surely gave less than a damn. Taking some liberties into the thought process of the 2006 population of Caledonia, they probably were happy to be down to 679. Am I accusing Racine County of racist practices within their law enforcement? You bet your ass I am. Don't worry, I'm going to do my best to take you there. Almost everything I know about Stephanie Goins is what I learned from witness statements while reading the courtroom transcripts. There's not much because this trial was over and done with within a period of 4 days, including jury selection. 4 freaking days. In retrospect, Brandon's trial took a lifetime compared to this bullshit, but that's not the impressive part when compared to our subject of Season 1. Whereas Brandon Woodruff's investigation went on for years, 4 to be exact. The subject matter of Season 2 was only afforded a portion of that time, a very small portion. So I feel like it's important for you, my AJ Army, to know a little bit about Stephanie. After all, she was a human being. She was someone's daughter. A little later in the season, when we get into the trial, we'll go over what the witnesses said about Stephanie, and a lot of it is not great. So just to get to know her a little now, before we get started, I wanted to read to you her obituary. This was really the only thing that I was able to find that talked about what kind of person she was. So here goes. Stephanie Desiree Louise Goins, 22, passed away on Saturday, January 14th, 2006. Stephanie was born April 13th, 1983, to William and Dorothy Goins in Racine. She was a 2001 graduate of J.I. Case High School. Stephanie was a student at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, majoring in sociology. She achieved her goal of becoming an honor student. Stephanie was a member and an employee of the St. Paul Baptist Church. She began as a volunteer while in high school and later became employed as an office assistant. She continued to volunteer her services on various committees and projects at the church. Stephanie was a dedicated volunteer in the REST homeless program as an intake coordinator. She was the assistant secretary of the William Jones Family Reunion Committee. Stephanie enjoyed spending time with family, and they loved her dearly. She had a great love for babies and small children and was always willing to babysit. Stephanie was quick to help with a smile wherever needed. She leaves to cherish special memories her parents, William and Dorothy Goins, brother, William Goins II, all of Racine, sister, Shermail Kasem of Memphis, Tennessee, grandfather, Lamar Goins of Racine, one niece, two nephews, and a host of aunts, uncles, cousins, church family, and friends. Stephanie was preceded in death by her grandparents, Samuel and Ruth Bridges, and Desiree Goins. Stephanie will be sadly missed. We loved her, but God loved her best. All right, so the murder occurred on January 14th, and the trial began on October 23rd of that same exact year. Insane, if you ask me. Regardless, the witnesses in this trial stated several times that Stephanie didn't just have a romantic relationship with the person who was accused of her murder, but had several other men on the side that did certain things for her, and she spent lots of time with them as well. As a matter of fact, no one even saw the subject of this season with this unfortunate girl prior to her death. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't know the girl personally and have no way to factually claim that she was slightly on the promiscuous side, but her friends sure did not hesitate to lead us all in that direction during their testimony. Sometimes you just have to call something what it is, right? After all, it's been 15 years. If anyone still has sore toes after that length of time, it's because they insist on keeping them sensitive. In a nutshell, Stephanie Goins got around until it killed her. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not going to start getting into victim shaming or anything like that. After all, there have been many other true crime stories about killers and serial killers that preyed on vulnerable women, prostitutes, single mothers trying to make ends meet, etc. Does that mean that any of them deserved what happened to them? No, of course not. However, what I am saying is that Stephanie's promiscuity will play a huge role in this case, and whether or not we can come to the conclusion that our subject committed the crime or not. I guess at this time I can stop calling him our subject matter of the season, and ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce to you Vincent Cosey. At the time this murder took place, Vincent Cosey, or as he likes to be called, and we'll be calling him throughout the season, Vinny, was 26 years old. He was into R&B and blues and hip-hop, like old school hip-hop, not the shit they make these days.
Oh, me? I resemble that remark.
Anyway, he also loved to play sports like basketball and football, and he definitely knew his way around a pool table. He also enjoyed spending time with his family. He's a self-proclaimed grill master, something I have always wished that I had more talent in. I always burned the steaks, and everyone got really mad at me. Oh well, I leave that up to others now. Also, when he was convicted, his children were 7 and 8 years old. Vinny has been in prison now since 2006, so he's missed out so far on 15 years of his children's lives. He missed their first date, their first dance, and of course, their high school graduation. So much someone can miss out on in 15 years. But he now spends his time in prison trying to get into as many programs as he can. Because of his sentence, life in prison, he's limited on what he can sign up for. I guess the state believes that If you're going to die in prison, why should they waste their money on making you a better person? Oh well. Anyway, let's let Vinny tell you about Vinny.
I basically was just did a lot of electronical work, whatever, on cars and stuff like that, and fish. You know, I did much volunteer work as I could when I could get back to, because that's what it was given to me when I had a chance to play football. So I like to get back to try to do that. But really, otherwise, I worked as a janitorial custodian and all that, and I really didn't have too much other things. I had a lot of hobbies, whatever I did, whatever, you know, I like to listen to radio. I was into, like, going to basketball games and stuff like that. You know, just a lot of stuff been taken from me since I've been here, though.
Oh, look, we have a writer's note. Yes. My head writer, C. Derick Miller, chimes in every once in a while with some personal observations that usually help give context to the story. And honestly, to me, they're some of the more interesting parts of the season. Okay, let's see what he has to say.
And now, hang on to your hats. Keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times, because it's time for a writer's note from head writer C. Derick Miller.
Vincent Cosey and his family are true victims of what I like to call jail culture. What is jail culture? It's something I came to notice while spending more than a decade with the Hunt County Sheriff's Department in Greenville, Texas. It's when incarceration, statistically within a lower income demographic regardless of the race associated with the individual, is inevitable and barely even noticed within a family unit. At any given time, one member of the family unit is incarcerated at all times, and it doesn't seem to affect the family unit in the slightest bit. It's become part of their day-to-day, week-to-week, and year-to-year lives, holidays and all. Sometimes it's the same person over and over again. Sometimes it's as though the family members take turns. Sometimes it's a father and son unit or a mother and daughter unit, and the only quality time they've ever spent together is while they were incarcerated. For years, I watched this scenario unfold over and over again before my eyes to the point where these people got to know me personally from all the interactions. Their family members would as well from the many visitations. We got to know each other on a first-name basis and would even interact when accidentally meeting up at other locations in town. What does my theoretical jail culture have to do with Vincent Cosey and his family? 2%. As you'll see, Vincent Cosey comes from a very large family, and he's not the only one in the family who is a repeat offender in the Racine County Criminal Justice Center. Not just small crimes for any of them either. Felonies. Some of them are violent felonies. Now, when you're part of the minority in a community the size of Caledonia, people remember. If you're the color of only 2% of the local population, people have a tendency to remember more. If these people remembering you are racist as hell, they'll never forget. Does this make any sense to anyone listening right now? The Cosey family was knee-deep in C. Derick Miller's theoretical jail culture behavior and, as you'll see as the season unfolds, weren't too helpful in the case against Vincent Cosey. If I do my job well, you'll all be shaking your head in agreement in the season finale. In my personal opinion, from picking up on little things in the court transcript, this entire trial was full of racist undertones and could have been racially motivated. Throwing those racial statistics into the mix, how many of the jurors were of African American descent? I would love to know.
Well, maybe we'll find out for you, C. Derick Miller. I'll keep on digging. So I've given you the what, the where, and when of the great village of Caledonia shenanigans of January 2006, but I've only given you a portion of the who. We know the victim and we know the accused or convicted, but there are other players in this crazy game, including the state's slam dunk witness who made the guilty verdict possible. Make sure you're sitting comfortably and try not to faint when I explain how it all went down. Enter Felicia Jones. Actually, I can't tell you much of anything about Felicia Jones. All I know is that she was Stephanie's best friend. Hell, I can't tell you much about any of these people. We don't have the luxury of being involved in this case for years like we did with Brandon Woodruff, although I hesitate to call it a luxury. Also, social media was still in its budding stages when this murder occurred, and no one has bothered to fill in the blanks when it comes to these individuals' internet footprint. What I can tell you for sure is that a girl named Felicia Jones claims that she heard Vincent Cosey's voice on Stephanie Goins' phone on the night of the murders. I mean, hell, if you can't have an eyewitness, I guess an ear witness will have to suffice. So you might be asking, how did this horrific murder happen? Stephanie was shot multiple times. There were no witnesses, no murder weapon was ever found, and no confession. It was investigated by Bradley Ritholm of the Caledonia PD, a Lieutenant Michaels, a Lieutenant Stannis, an investigator by the name of Bill Warmington, and a Captain Pavilonis of the Racine Police Department. Also, the parts of the inept gaggle of courtroom participants are as follows. Prosecutors are District Attorney Robert Repeshak and Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Tank Adams. The defense attorneys were Raina Morales and Deborah Patterson. The case was presided over by Judge Emily S. Mueller. Now that the name dropping is over, mostly so these people can sound interesting at a party because they were mentioned over the ever-growing popularity of American Justice Podcast, let's talk about why. Yeah, right. Like anyone would ever be able to determine that. Until then, all we have is speculation and a wordy writer by the name of C. Derick Miller. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about what he has to say throughout this second season. After all, neither of us know these people. We're not in contact with any of them like we were our first season subject. This means we can speculate all we want. We can step on toes. We can reach into the deepest depths of our own minds without worrying whether or not we'll offend somebody. We also don't have to worry about making an ex-best friend mad or a crazed sister upset and meeting them in a heated confrontation on our own porch. Don't worry, though, just as I did in the first season. I plan on giving you just the facts. Maybe a little opinion here and there, but I'll do my best to keep that to a minimum. After all, I do have to keep this story interesting. I mean, no one wants to just sit here and listen to me rattle off facts. Also, one thing about Vinny. He was a bragger. He was not quite what someone would call a career criminal, but he was definitely known by the cops. I'm almost certain that this has everything to do with the fact that there are only a handful of black families in the Caledonia area. If certain members of law enforcement had a tendency to notice such things as race, I can see where they'd remember him. Also, it didn't help that Vincent was reported as bragging about a gun he had in his car not long before he was accused of murder. Sometimes those insignificant brags and tiny lies can add up into larger things at the most inopportune time. All right, before we get out of here today, let's hear from Nick from the True Crime Garage on how he got involved in the case. As I said, we'll be hearing from him throughout the season, but I'm sure everyone is interested to know how he got involved. All right, here we go. I guess the first thing is, Nick, first of all, thank you very much for doing this and being on the American Justice Podcast. We're very pleased to have you. And I would like for you to kind of explain to everybody the first part of it is, how did you get involved and how did this come across your desk, so to speak?
So I got involved in the Vincent Cosey, Stephanie Goins case from 2006 because of a letter I received in the mail, and I had never heard of the case until receiving the letter itself. It was not the first letter that I've received from an inmate. I've received several of them, and I brought a couple of them with me here today, Scott. And I'll read just a piece or two from each of these. But here's one that I received that says, "Hello, my name is," we'll leave his name out. "I am 38 years old. I'm a prisoner. I have been in prison since I was about 16 years old. I was accused of murder. I know that you receive many of these types of letters from prisoners, some pleading, some angry, those who are both innocent and those who are guilty. I have a story to tell, and I hope you will take the time to listen." Obviously, I'm leaving the big bulk of that out where he tells us about his case. And then here's another one that I've received. "I'm sending you this letter in hope and prayer that you will help me out of this nightmare that I am currently in. I was given your information by a friend." And this is another man who is incarcerated and looking for help. Now, the letter that I received in regards to this case, Scott, starts off, "Hello, I am writing you to request your help in appealing my conviction. I am unable to litigate my case. I am not competent to understand the law." And it goes on to tell me a little bit about the case and reasons why this individual believes that he is innocent and can present to the courts that he is, in fact, innocent. This is a man who is appealing his case, obviously, and he doesn't feel that he was given the best trial that one could receive. And he says some nice things along the way. And he says, "I feel that you can help me prove my innocence. I would like to know if there's an application process." There's no application process. I'm just some regular Joe working out of my garage doing a podcast, True Crime Garage podcast. And this gentleman tells me that he received my information from his mother, which was interesting to me. And it's signed, respectfully, Mr. Vincent Cosey. And it goes on to give the facility where he is currently living along with his inmate number. So I've received several of these letters, and I do write back to some of the individuals, not all of them. And I chose to write back to Mr. Vincent Cosey. And in the meantime, Scott, you know this better than most, that the letters don't come fast from the prisons and they don't arrive fast to the prisons. And so in the meantime, while I'm waiting to hear if this gentleman would like to return a letter to me after reaching back to him, I did take a little look at his case. And so I went back in time and I started looking at the newspaper articles from the Wisconsin area in 2006. And frankly, I didn't like what I saw. I saw what seemed to me a case that was pretty black and white, what was being presented in the newspapers anyway, of a man who flew off the handle and had some type of relationship with the victim, and somehow an altercation ended with her being shot several times. And the things they were saying in the paper made Vincent Cosey look very guilty. And so he sent me back another letter, and we traded a couple more, and I was fine to just let it kind of fade out and fizzle away. But there was something to his story that I couldn't really shake. When I've communicated with inmates in the past, at some point I understand that communication is going to stop, or I'm just going to let it fizzle out because they're clearly guilty. They want some help from me. I don't have any help that I can offer someone that deserves to be where they are. And so normally these things just kind of make their way and I move on. But with Vincent's case, there was something that was rubbing me the wrong way. And part of it was his demeanor, his personality. It didn't seem to fit what they were accusing him of. But look, I mean, we don't live in a perfect world, obviously, and there are smart, polite individuals that murder other people. It happens regularly, unfortunately. And so I wasn't to be fooled that way. And I'm not, Mr. Naive here. I've been doing true crime and doing the podcast for a long time. And I like to feel that and think that I have a good gut instinct. And so while I was not liking what I was seeing in the papers, there was something about his case that I couldn't shake. And the more I got to communicating with Vincent, I learned some things about the case that really struck me as odd. First off, an ear witness. Oh my goodness. We have an ear witness. Everybody stop what you're doing. Let's lock this man up immediately for the rest of his life. One of the star witnesses for the prosecution is an individual that tells police, I have never met this man. I didn't know his name, but hold your horses, because I was on my phone talking with my friend, and I could hear a man in the background, and that had to be her boyfriend. The witness referred to Vincent as Stephanie's boyfriend. And that struck me as incredibly weird. I mean, we have better eyewitnesses that saw people other than Oswald shoot JFK down in Texas, and nothing's ever happened with that case. We have an individual that says, I've never met this person, don't know their name. Oh, but I can identify them by voice because I heard them in the background of a cell phone call. And that essentially, as you know, Scott, is how they being the detectives and the law enforcement in that area, locked on to Vincent Cosey, and they started looking at this guy. And then the other thing that struck me as odd is that he turns himself in. He kind of knows, he knows that police are looking for him. He knows that the detectives are looking for him because they came and they searched his home, and they communicated this to his family. And he goes and he turns himself in. And then he pleads not guilty. I've been doing this long enough to know that usually those two things don't happen. When somebody pleads not guilty, they don't walk up to the police station and say, here I am, lock me up, let's go to trial. They don't do that. And then turn around and say, nope, I'm not guilty. So that was a very rare thing. And it was rare enough that I questioned a lot of what I read in the papers. And then the ear witness I found to be very strange. But then I had this weird thing of I'm diving and digging back into the case again, Scott, and I'm seeing things that don't look good for Vincent again. And I really was on the fence. And I was having a conversation with my wife, and she said, you look annoyed. And I said, yeah, I am a little annoyed. I said, I'm been communicating with this man. His name is Vincent Cosey. He's an inmate in Wisconsin. He says he's innocent. I said, there is something to his story, but everything that I'm seeing and finding elsewhere other than from him is telling me and telling my gut instinct, this guy's probably guilty. And she goes, so you don't believe him? And I said, yeah, look, there are prisons all over this country filled with innocent men. And I hope you hear the sarcasm in that, because that's what I mean. If you read Shawshank Redemption, he says every guy in here is innocent. However, I've only believed about 4 of them, and I've spent almost a lifetime in this prison. And so that's just the way that it is, the lay of the land. And she said to me, she's a pretty good judge of character. Now, she's never spoke to Vincent, never read any of his letters or anything like that. She's just reacting off of me. And she says, well, what is he telling you? I said, he's adamant that he's innocent, that he did not have anything to do with this, that he actually was hanging out with her that day, leaves her several hours before she's murdered, according to his story. And whatever went down, and now he's taking the blame. That's his general story. And that the cops built a case off of not a whole lot, but they built enough around it to convince a jury that may have been bamboozled. I don't know, but it looked a little rough. But I got to tell you, Scott, I was a little more leaning on the side of the fence of letting this thing go, letting it fizzle out, because I was not just unsure, but also kind of leaning a little bit more toward guilt. And it was my wife who said, I think there's something here. And again, she's not reviewing any of the information. She's saying, what is it about this guy that you can't shake? And I said, I can't put my finger on it. And she said, well, there's probably something here. Maybe he's telling you he's innocent because he is. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give this a little bit longer. I'm going to give this a few more conversations, a few more letters, and see what happens. The next thing I know, he and I are trading phone calls, and it was better to talk with him than to receive letters, because you can get a little bit more of personality and emotion from speaking with someone. And I found over the phone exactly what I thought from the letters I had received, that this is an individual that didn't strike me as somebody capable of doing what they said that he did. And so I found Vincent to be polite, intelligent, and understanding. In a weird way, Scott, he's understanding of the situation that he's in. Even if it's completely unjust, he's understanding of how he got there, the case that was built against him. He's also, in a weird way, understanding of that they don't want to seem to help him now. And that struck me as something very intriguing as well. And I know he's tried some of the more traditional routes. I believe that he told me at one time he was, and I'm using air quotes here, on the waiting list for the Wisconsin Innocence Project, or what, I don't know exactly what it's called. I don't have those notes in front of me, and Scott, you and I know what that means when we're told someone is on the waiting list. That could mean, really, to me, that means one of two things. You're on a waiting list that's going to last years before they get to you, or you're not really on any list at all. And that's not a shot at the Wisconsin Innocence Project, because I don't know their work. And I'm sure they do great work, and I'm hoping that they do. I'm just saying, with a lot of these innocence projects, wherever they come from, they are overloaded with cases. They do receive a lot of cases of people that are actually guilty. I'm sure that they get many applicants of people that are guilty. They have to sift through those themselves. It's not a quick process. Even once they find somebody like Vincent, who does have a good case to present, that, hey, you might have got this wrong. It's a very long process to take that from the initial meeting to getting all the information and actually filing these appeals and getting another date in court. The thing that jumps off the page time and time again with Vincent's case is it's not a sexual assault case, but there is DNA evidence that the state of Wisconsin has. Vincent's saying at this point, could somebody just test it? Could we test it? And nobody wants to test it. And so that's where we find ourselves today, and where I found myself. It was a year and a half ago that I received Vincent's first letter, and we traded letters for a while. And then I was doing True Crime Garage, do it every week. We put out a new case every week. And I was working on Brandon Woodruff's case, and we covered his case in 2 episodes, 435 and episode 436. And when I was researching that case, I came across your name, you and C. Derick, your partner there. And I was listening to the American Justice Podcast, season 1. I thought, these guys did amazing work on Brandon's case. And I go into every one of these cases, Scott, trying to be 100% straight down the middle. I let the information guide me where I go. And the work that you guys did on his case, and specifically you guys putting together a timeline that didn't seem to fit the prosecution or the detective's timeline in Brandon's case. I kept telling Vincent, I said, we got a couple problems here. I'm not an attorney. I'm some schmuck in a garage who's putting out a show. I'm happy to have an audience. And I said, we need somebody that has the ability to take on your case and force the hand of the courts. Let's test this evidence. And you know what? If you ain't going to test it, state of Wisconsin, turn it over to us. We'll pay for it, and we'll test it ourselves and see what happens. Because look, we're not trying to take anything away from what happened here. A young woman who had a bright future ahead of her Stephanie Goings was killed. Somebody killed her. I don't know who it was. I've told Vincent, I don't know 100% that you're innocent. All I can tell you is I know that I don't think you got or received a fair trial. And I see that there's evidence that hasn't been tested that should be. When I see that, that reminds me of the Eddie O'Brien case out in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And then the information you guys put together in Brandon Woodruff's case, there's reasonable doubt. It's called beyond a reasonable doubt. Brandon Woodruff's case, there's plenty of reasonable doubt. Vincent Cosey's case, reasonable doubt until you test this evidence. If you test it and it comes back and they got it right, it was Vincent, then that's the answer. And I've told Vincent that, are you willing to take that risk? Because if we test this stuff and it comes back and it's you, nobody's going to help you ever again. And I'm hoping that we can help him. And so after seeing the good work you guys did at American Justice Podcast, I thought, you know what? It's a shot in the dark. This Scott guy seems like a good guy. I could tell from the podcast. I got another one of those good gut feelings that told me this guy's a guy that cares. And not only that, more importantly, I could tell the way that you combed through the details of Brandon's case, that if you found whatever case you took on next, you would take the time to painstakingly go through all those details in the next one. And that's all I was hoping for. And I thought, you know what? I have a good amount of information on Vincent's case. If Scott gets interested in this, he will do the due diligence. He'll put in the effort and he will go through this thing and he'll tell me the truth. He'll say, Nick, I think we got a good case here. I think we got a bad case here. You looked at it and you said, I think we got something here. And I'm just so glad that you took it on. And I'm just so glad to be sitting here talking with you after we've been talking for months about this case. And it puts a smile on my face. And I know it puts a smile on Vincent's face. And I've spoke with some of his family as well. And this is even just sitting here and having this conversation today, Scott, on microphone and putting this case out to the world, because this received such little media attention, even when it happened in 2006. But if they got it wrong, that's the only way that this is going to get recognized by anybody, is by throwing it out there. And so I've suggested to him to reach out to other innocence projects and programs, because most of them, the majority of them, they want the actual wrongfully convicted individual to be filing and applying for all that stuff. They don't want this guy, average Joe, working out of his garage, filing for anything. So he's told me that he's been doing that. And I said, in the meantime, I'm going to reach out to Scott at American Justice Podcast, see if he'll be interested in your story, and we'll take it from there. And it's like I said, it's been 1.5 years since I received that first letter.
All right. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of the second season of the American Justice Podcast. Rest up and clear your head. This season will be 10 episodes long. It's not going to be nearly as long as last season, but as I explained, that's because we don't have the material that we had to work with in Brandon Woodruff's case. That brings me to something I think it's worth noting about this investigation. Not only did the murder to arrest to trial timeline take less than 1 year, but the investigation in this case was completely what I like to call a take our word for it investigation. That means that there were no recordings made whatsoever.
And now, it's time for a patent-pending Scott Poggensee personal opinion.
Wow, not even one episode in, and I'm already throwing shade. Okay, I want to start off this rant by saying that I am a huge supporter of the police. Of course, it's very possible that any day I may need their assistance. I mean, if someone is breaking into my house, I'm going to have to rely on the cops to come scoop up the dead body. But seriously, the police protect and serve and put their own lives on the line every single day to make sure that our lives are safe and secure. I cannot thank them enough for that. So if you're a police officer, thank you for your service. I want to make that very clear because what I'm about to say may sound like a criticism when it's really just meant to be a reality check. I mean, there are bad cops out there. I think we can all agree to that. But by and large, thankfully, I believe that those are very few and far between. However, they are out there. And one of the reasons that the police make recordings is it so that there is no question about what a defendant or a witness said to the police. If you have a suspect tell the cop, "Yep, I did it," and then later try to recant that admission, there is no he said situation. There's the suspect, now probably a defendant, right on the videotape saying that he did it. There is no trying to say you didn't say that. Of course, that's just one reason to make a recording, but it's a big one. When I found out that there were absolutely no recordings made in this case by any police officer at any time, I literally couldn't believe it. I went back through all the notes looking for anywhere that it said, and I started the recording device. And sure enough, it was nowhere to be found. So that leads us to what some might think is a criticism of the police. Why wouldn't you record what witnesses are telling you? Of course, it wouldn't be a big deal if everyone had agreed with what the police reported, but as you'll see, a huge piece of evidence that the police used is that they said that Vinny's mother and sister both said that Vinny confessed to them. I mean, that's huge. And if it's true, that would be crazy. But as you can guess by now, Vinny's mother and sister both say that they never said that. Surprise, surprise, huh? Yeah, not so much. If we had a recording, there wouldn't even be a question. I just don't get it, ladies and gentlemen. I just don't get it. When I was discussing this with C. Derick, he brought up that this was just one more black person that they had to do away with. So why bother with the details or doing things by the book? I understand that, but guess what? Now we have a he said, she said situation. The police said that they said that, and they say that they didn't. Who to believe? Normally, I of course would say the police. But as we'll reveal throughout the season, these investigators, they do some really shady shit. The police are not above reproach. Why, just a couple months ago, there was a detective in New York that was arrested and charged with perjury. Here's what the New York Times article says. Over nearly 2 decades as a police officer and narcotics detective, Joseph E. Franco made thousands of arrests, many for the possession and sale of drugs. Mr. Franco often worked undercover, and his testimony secured convictions for prosecutors around the city. But officials who once relied on Mr. Franco are questioning his accounts. After he was accused of lying about drug sales that videos showed never happened, Mr. Franco was charged with perjury in Manhattan in 2019. Now, the fallout over Mr. Franco's police work is spreading. As many as 90 convictions that he helped secure in Brooklyn will be thrown out. Prosecutors plan to announce on Wednesday. Many more cases in other boroughs could follow. A reckoning that lawyers said appears larger than any in the city's legal system in recent history. So as you can see, the police lying, A, does happen, and B, can cause a lot of problems for the district attorney. So why not be above reproach? Why not just record what happens so you don't even have to worry about it? As you'll see throughout the season, there are a lot of things that piss me off about this case. No recordings being made is just one of them. All right, let's wrap it up for now. Next week, we'll cover jury selection. Here's a little hint. It's not good. Okay. Until then, remember to stay aware, stay strong, and get involved. See you next week.
The American Justice Podcast is owned and copyrighted by Atua Productions, LLC. Your host is Scott Poggensee, and your writer is C. Derick Miller. The theme music for the American Justice Podcast has been created and composed by Josh DeRosa. Scripted and recorded episodes are published every Sunday morning, with follow-up Q&A episodes released on Fridays. You can find the Q&A episodes on YouTube by searching for American Justice Podcast. Atua Productions aims for this to be an interactive podcast where you, the audience, has a great amount of influence on the content of our shows. You can interact with us in several ways. First, and most preferred, is you can leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 972-942-0444. Be sure to leave your name and the city you're calling from, along with whether or not we can use your voice on the air. If Facebook is more your style, you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Feel free to leave a comment, or you can message us on Messenger if you have a more pressing question or issue. If you would like to blog about the show, then you can log on to AmericanJusticePodcast.com and tell us what you think there. You can find many of the documents discussed in this episode there as well. If you are a tweeter, you can also voice your opinion on Twitter at @AJusticePodcast. If you would like to support the show, you can do so in a couple different ways. First, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/AJPodcast. We have different levels of support that include t-shirts, guest call-in spots, and early access to our podcast and YouTube shows. Next, you can like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get notifications of when we publish episodes. We would also very much appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review. If you have any comments about the show, or more importantly, any tips on the case we're discussing, please call 972-942-0444 and leave us a message. After all, if the subject of our podcast is innocent, that means someone out there is guilty. American Justice Army? Let's find them.